All right, and for more on this, we're joined on the line then by political analyst Richard Mahomva. Thank you very much for joining us, Richard. Good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning, and thanks for inviting me to engage.
You're welcome, sir. As a start, we've had some analysts saying to us that this is the most peaceful election in Zimbabwe ever. You agree with those sentiments?
Yeah, not only is it just a peaceful election, but it's an election which is characterized by greater embracement of particular reforms as far as the election processes are concerned.
What's your perception of the elections so far? I mean, we know that vote counting is underway, but of course yesterday we saw long lines of people voting, and I understand from some of the reports on the ground that people were generally sort of jubilant. What has been your sort of overall analysis of the Zimbabwe election so far as we get into that vote counting which is underway?
First and foremost, there was overwhelming registration for people to participate. That was courtesy of the DVR system, which has been thought to be transparent. But secondly, there's new faces to power, and that motivated a new interest in the new audience. And the fact that the political environment has given prospects of freeness and fairness, this actually steered the public to try and come up and vote, and this has brought a contrarian view to the party voting culture that has since characterized the past elections. So I think there was massive participation, and this is why they could not even end the queues in some sections of the voting spaces.
Yesterday I had a panel of about 3 people in studio, and we were analyzing as we're going into those elections just as the polls sort of opened. And most of those in the studio were of the impression that there is this sort of fear factor, and saying that fear is still a big part of elections in Zimbabwe and a major factor in Zimbabwe, and that there is this voter intimidation still that is there. Do you believe that is correct? I mean, I've heard other reports saying that that fear has somewhat been removed from people.
Fortunately enough, I was involved in a nationwide survey that was making an inquiry about that. And a greater part of the respondents were arguing that they did not experience interpolitical violence, and there were responses that people are saying they are not being intimidated whatsoever. And even if you read the findings of the Afro Barometer, one of the prominent election poll surveys, it was projecting issues around that particular line of thought. So you discover that there are narratives that exist largely on social media, and the narratives that exist within particular political context, political parties as propaganda, which have been validated as facts, and that's the challenge that we have in terms of our analysis when people project some of these things.
Why would that sort of propaganda be pushed through the media, do you think?
Because of late, the opposition's political traction has been based on projecting crisis nationalism, projecting issues of violence. Now that such is no longer there, then you find out that the opposition really no longer has anything solid to project as far as its victimhood is concerned, because the environment has actually changed. So then they need to sustain a discourse of victimhood, so that they can always preempt any outcome that might not come in their favor. But while they could also be hangovers within our people who experienced violence and all of that, and they might continuously reflect on past memories to try and give probably an impression of the same in a changed present environment.
Well, the final results are expected by the weekend, but of course we are likely to start sort of getting an indication of the outcome from today. Can you give us some of your early predictions and what you think the outcomes will probably be from what you've assessed?
might be a very thin margin between the winning party and the losing party. And this is because due to the open space created, there was vigorous campaigns that the leading parties, yet the which is the MDC alliance and ZANU-PF. So it's either we're going to have a very thin margin, or we might find ourselves going back probably to a coalition government. Because look, people participated intensely in both strongholds of the ruling and the MDC, and that on its own might create a very thin margin for a prospect for a coalition.
Now, you talk about coalition, and, the fact of the matter really is that this is a sort of two-horse race between Mnangagwa and Nelson Chamisa. But, talk to us about some of the other parties that have kind of caused some kind of dent in Zimbabwe. I know that in South Africa we're talking about the MDC and ZANU-PF, but perhaps there are actually parties that were on that ballot paper that are, in fact, have some kind of influence in Zimbabwe. Could you perhaps talk to us about those parties who might have to, in fact, be negotiating with whoever would then be the opposition to form, I don't know, some kind of coalition in that respect?
Yeah, I think to talk about opposition influence, the starting point would be on Chamisa faction, because you remember traditionally the MDC has always had prominence, and with the departure of Morgan Tsvangirai, Chamisa was able to brand MDC in the interest of continuity to a point that certain smaller parties yet to come in to the alliance, whereas the other half of MDC led by Mugabe really did not have so much traction. So this is why when we speak of the opposition, really, because politics is about numbers, you would look at even the rallies that Mugabe had, you can't compare them with the rallies that Chamisa had. You look at what the rallies that Njuru had, you can't compare the campaigns that she had with those of Nelson Chamisa. So as it ends, when we're talking about opposition politics, really the real orbit of power resides with Nelson Chamisa, and all these other smaller parties don't constitute a significant sphere of influence. So this is why the debate really has largely been between the MDC alliance and the mother of opposition in the form of the MDC alliance.
Now, talk to us about, you touched on it briefly, but this possible runoff on the 8th of September should none of the candidates win more than half of the vote. Explain to us that procedure.
Sorry?
So there will be a runoff on September 8th should none of the candidates get more than half the vote. Explain to us what happens should that indeed happen.
Yeah, usually if that happens, we will certainly go into a runoff. But then when I seem to be getting your question to say, what then happens if such a scenario prevails? Yes. What are my scenario readings? In this case, my scenario readings are that, look, they are observers, and observers are going to give credit on the legitimacy of this result. And I see a situation whereby that is going to be embraced, because I think what has been raised largely by the opposition has just been political rhetoric. To say, well, we will not embrace the results and would not want to get into a GNU. But look, if the international community legitimizes the result, and considering the issues of credibility that are genuinely associated with that, I foresee them accepting going into a GNU. There is no other way besides that.
No, it's always very difficult, and I'm going to bring on our next guest, Mr. Farooq Shumba, in the studio in a short while. But, one of the things that is always sort of significant when you're talking about Zimbabwe, when you're talking about the Zim elections, is, of course, the voice of former President Robert Mugabe. And, of course, we saw him holding that press briefing at the weekend. What were your views of that? Was that impactful in any way? And do you think that, some of that rhetoric that he shared and the fact that he was saying he's going to vote for the MDC, do you think that it will in any way affect Zimbabweans? Or do you think that, or are Zimbabweans sort of going, so what? It doesn't matter what he has to say really at this point?
I think in some instances it was perceived as his final validation of the opposition leader against the background of rumored issues and conspiracies around him funding the NDC. So that might have a good bearing when it comes to drawing support from the undecided voter who was not sure how to move on after Mugabe was ejected from the system. But really that is an issue of probability. But at the same time, that delegitimizes the entire work that Nelson Chamisa has done, because you recall that state propaganda also reciprocated by then beginning to indicate that he is being stupefied by the former president, because really there is a particular constituency that he has got bits of discomfort around the former president. But again, there's those that are in the rural areas and other people that still have confidence in the 94-year-old. So he's coming back really buttresses the new narrative that could actually influence the voting pattern in a different direction.
All right, let me bring in and welcome Mr. Farooq Shumba, political analyst and blogger. Thank you so very much, sir, for coming to Afro Breakfast. We welcome you here at Afro Worldview.
It's a pleasure, Mel.
All right, and I'm going to start off by talking about Chamisa and the MDC's chances, just picking up where Richard left off. What are your views of Nelson Chamisa? Do you think that, well, apart from the fact of him being ready for presidency, but are Zimbabweans at this stage ready for relatively young leadership to come in at this point? And really, what are his chances? What are Nelson Chamisa's chances? I mean, we're seeing that, the latest opinion polls are showing that this is going to be a very tight race, even though Mnangagwa was viewed initially as the front runner. What are your perceptions now?
Okay, for a person who took over the MDC like a few months ago, he has done very, very well. Yeah. We have seen from his campaign. And currently, if you follow on social media, the releases that have been done, it's not official results yet because they haven't been announced, but a lot of polling stations in the rural areas, strongholds of Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF, have shown that Chamisa is the MDC has been winning. So at the end of the day, there's been a change in the voters, because voters are voting for Chamisa from ZANU-PF strongholds, and he has maintained the urban vote that ZANU-PF, that MDC has always had. So his chances are very, very good. And as Zimbabweans ready for Chamisa, I think Zimbabweans are ready for change. Zimbabweans have been waiting for democracy, they've been waiting for change. Yeah. And I think the change would be, Chamisa would be anybody besides ZANU-PF.
Now, ZANU-PF, though, they don't strike me as a party. And I mean, look how long they've been in power, how long the party's been in power, how long Robert Mugabe was in power. ZANU-PF doesn't strike me as a party that would take a loss very simply or very easily. They wouldn't take it lying down. What do you think would happen in the likelihood that the MDC does, in fact, come out victorious from these elections? What do you think will happen? What will the ZANU-PF party likely do? Would they cause unrest in Zimbabwe?
That's a bit difficult to guess. But given the last election where ZANU-PF lost and they took months to release the election, we might be faced with the same scenario. But at the present moment, I think because Mnangagwa and them are trying to project themselves as Democrats, they've been trying to have this facade that they are democratic. I think they have no choice but to accept the result. We have to give it to him, though, because he has given us a freer environment in terms of the campaigning. There was no violence. People could campaign freely. Chamisa could hold rallies in the rural areas. So I think he has created an environment where this election and this defeat for ZANU-PF might be possible. We are not sure if they've lost it, but at the present moment, it looks like they've lost or they're going to lose. So I think he's made the environment possible. So I think him creating that environment meant he might be ready to accept whatever result was coming in. Maybe he was banking on the support from the coup, that maybe the support from the coup would let people vote for him, and it hasn't panned out that way. So I think ZANU-PF, the way they've structured the election currently is different from previous elections, so probably they are prepared for a defeat or for a victory.
What can you attribute? I mean, one would always say, what can you attribute violence to? But I suppose the question now is the inverse of that. What would you attribute this sort of peace to? You know, I mean, we've heard people saying that this is the most peaceful election that Zimbabwe has ever experienced. Are you really going to attribute it to the same ZANU-PF that in all these years has been the reason for there being violent elections?
I think there are two factors.
Yeah.
One, there was the quest for legitimacy, because the way the economy is right now is almost crashing.
Yeah.
So they were looking for legitimacy. Then there's another thing as well in terms of ZANU-PF. In 2013, the election that Mugabe won resoundingly, there was also relative peace.
Yeah.
So that's why the opposition was worried about the Electoral Commission and the ballot boxes, and there was a lot of accusations about the ballots and everything and stuffing. So ZANU-PF, I think, have moved from violence. They've found new strategies which are to do with rigging, which they're accused of to do with rigging. Yeah. So I think they were confident that maybe they'll be able to pull up some stunts. But what we have seen, right, like from yesterday, from last evening, people have been posting the results from every polling station. So like, the room for rigging is going to be very difficult, because right now, as we speak, results have not been announced yet, but everybody knows that in almost every rural constituency, in almost every place where the vote has been counted, results have been plastered on the walls, and those results have been shared on social media. So at the present moment, the room for rigging is not there. Okay, we're waiting for areas where ZANU-PF normally comes up with huge victories, because at the present moment, we are seeing maybe some areas where there's like a small gap for Chamisa, so we are not sure yet.
Yes, yes.
But I think the main reason why there was peace was probably because they had other cards on their deck.
Yeah, you know, often, one will, I mean, for people like us who are on social media, we kind of try to get a feel for things from the social media space, whether it be your Twitters or, Facebook and all of that. But a lot of the time, what we see on social media and the views and perceptions there on social media aren't really a reflection of what's going on the ground. I know that's true for in the South African context, and I'm not sure if that's the same for Zimbabwe. I mean, if I'm looking now, I'm scrolling on Twitter, for example, I see a lot of people saying already, congratulations to President-elect Nelson Chamisa. Are the views necessary that we see on your social media a reflection of what's going on the ground? Because remember, there's the rural areas, there's the villages, there's the people who don't necessarily have access to your Twitters and your social medias. So I'd like to sort of get information from you of really what would be going on, on the ground in Zimbabwe.
Okay, yeah, so if you look at social media, obviously Zimbabweans, there's a lot of Zimbabweans in the diaspora, South Africa, UK, Australia, Botswana. Those are the majority of Zimbabweans on social media. So it's not a true reflection. Even if you look at the polls on social media, they would obviously show people supporting Chamisa at 70 to 80%, because most of us probably are are running away from ZANU-PF for economic migrants. So social media is not a true reflection, but you can also rule out its influence. At the present moment, Zimbabwe's internet penetration rate is about 50%. So people have access to social media, be it WhatsApp, be it Twitter. So social media can be a barometer of what's happening. So in terms of the present moment, what social media is doing is releasing the results before they are released.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we cannot really say releasing the results because everybody's trying to avoid breaking the law and being arrested, but we are giving a snippet of what has happened at some polling stations. And the only way is once it's uploaded on social media, nobody can change it anymore. So it has an effect because people do have smartphones everywhere, and internet access is there. So even the campaigns, because the state media was heavily biased against the MDC alliance, what has happened is people would receive WhatsApp clips of Chamisa. That's why you would find even on social media, grannies and people from the rural areas expressing their support for Chamisa.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's been a factor, and even this election has been an interesting battle. I think there was paid Twitter from ZANU-PF, and then there was ordinary Zimbabweans that were supporting the alliance that want change, because at the end of the day, we have to accept that the majority of Zimbabweans want change. And I do not believe the majority of Zimbabweans see change coming from ZANU-PF.
Let me bring back Mr. Richard Mahomva, a political analyst who's joining us on the line at the moment. Richard, and I think I'm going to pose the same question to both of you, gentlemen. What do you believe to be, the future of Zimbabwe, whichever way, the election, the results play out? What do you believe to be the future? I mean, at the end of the day, I think the people of Zimbabwe really want to see, the economy back to where it needs to be. The people of Zimbabwe would like to be able to, freely walk into grocery stores and they know that the shelves will be full. They don't have to stress about, money, food, those kinds of issues. What is the future of Zimbabwe, which either way the elections play out?
The future of Zimbabwe is anchored on what has been referred to as permanent national interests. And these permanent national interests emanate from the values of our liberation, and these include democracy, these include economic progress, these include developed public service provisions, and all of that. So basically they are permanent national interests, and these reside in our history, and which actually defines the present, and these always offer a template for good governance. So basically the future of Zimbabwe resides in permanent interests, which are economic, which are political, but these are defined in the context that in a context that is supposed to be marked by good governance, good policy making, and all of that. That is the future of Zimbabwe. And Zimbabweans will always vote within that pretext.
All right, Mr. Mahomva, thank you very much for your time there. And I'll close it off with you, Mr. Shumba. What are your views of the future of Zimbabwe? You heard Mr. Mahomva there talking about the permanent national interest, which includes democracy, economic progress, etc. What are your views going forward?
I think we are faced with two futures. The first future is what we already know. The people that are incapable of governing, that are corrupt, that promise things. Because for the past 8 months, we've been hearing about mega deals and things that are being promised that haven't happened. Yeah. And then we cannot trust that there's going to be any change under ZANU-PF. The first thing that he did was to bring the same old cabinet. There's currency shortages. There is no changes under ZANU-PF. So at the end of the day, we are faced with two futures. If we go the ZANU-PF route, you might talk a good game, but I think we'll be faced with the same scenario where, like, some of us probably will never be able to go back home again.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for bringing it back home and making it personal there. All right, Farooq Shumba, political analyst and blogger, I appreciate your time. And of course, we had Richard Mahomva on the line joining us there as well. Of course, we continue to bring you information, analysis and reports out of Zimbabwe. We do know that vote counting is currently underway after yesterday's late end to those elections. Do stay with us for more news. Afro Breakfast returns.